Welcome to Software Without Borders, where we delve into the limitless potential of software and how it's transforming businesses globally. I'm your co-host, Jarrett Striner, and with me today is my trusty co-host, the CEO of Accelerance, Andy Hilliard. With over 2 decades of experience leading global agile teams and driving digital transformations across diverse sectors, Troy Hiltbrand is here to share his insights on a crucial yet often overlooked aspect of building successful teams: the heart behind the strategy. We're diving into why it's not just about having smart people on your team, but about the connections, trust, and personal investments that truly make a difference. So buckle up as we explore how to choose the right partners, build trust, and foster a team culture that drives real success. Welcome to the show, Troy.
Thanks, Jared.
So you've had an impressive career leading diverse global teams. Can you share a bit about how your journey into digital transformation began and what initially drew you to this field?
Absolutely. So I've always loved technology. It's just been a passion of mine. I started out as a software developer, and I was doing building systems. Then I got into what really is my passion, which was analytics, working with the data, understanding the why things are happening, and being able to measure what is happening. That led me into digital transformation because as I looked at data, what I found is that the data is all about behaviors, and so is software. And so when we start to take a look at it, it's about marrying data and software, but ultimately it's about driving behaviors on your end user. And so that's really where your digital transformation comes into play, is when you can use technology to help people be better, do better, and achieve the goals that they have. And it's all about behaviors.
It's funny that you say that. My beginning of my career was kind of the same. I started as UI and UX and then kind of built it into doing analytics and looking at data because how does somebody use a website, right? Where are they going? What are they doing? Then you can make, decisions on that. But knowing that you started looking at data itself, where was that aha moment that's like, well, there's more to it than just looking at the numbers? How did you take that leap into doing more of the transformation and really digging into the data more to just go and make, the right decisions? Because I know sometimes people are like, well, I feel this will work, but I feel this work doesn't always work. It's more about the data proves that this works.
No, absolutely. It's incredible as you start to take a look at the patterns in the data, and then you're able to do some A/B testing and see if you make small changes, what is the impact of those changes. Now, that's on the back end. On the front end, one of the things that I love to do is take the data and figure out, how do we craft promotions? How do we craft pricing? How do we craft the software to drive new behaviors? And that's one of the things that right now is a critical part of my job, is really taking that data and figuring out, how can we not only predict what is going to happen, but how can we make it happen?
Troy, can you explain a little bit more, give us a little bit of history and journey as to the type of industries and companies and business models you've actually grown up through and been involved with and are involved with currently?
Sure. So right now, I am part of the direct sales industry. The direct sales, the way that that works is that we have independent distributors all around the world who are reselling our product. I've been in that industry for about 8 years. Before that, I was in government. So I worked at one of the national nuclear laboratories, um, building tools, developing solutions that would allow our workers to be more effective. I've also worked in the mining and the drilling industry with another global company where we were doing a large implementation of an ERP system. It was, and I was working with a cross-functional team of business users. So I've always had kind of this propensity towards working the business side of technology, but I often get my hands dirty with the technology as well.
Sure. Can you also paint a picture throughout that journey as far as how you were tasked with developing IP, developing software, and how you, what manifestations of team building you have been through, and that would be interesting to hear.
Sure.
Yeah.
Probably one of the best cases of that was about 9 years ago, when I came into an organization as the chief digital officer. And
Mm.
as the chief digital officer, I didn't have a team. I was tasked with kind of looking out and figuring out what our sales reps needed in terms of tools, in terms of technology. And as part of that, so I went through and I looked at competitors, I looked at feedback that we were getting from the field, and I started to build a roadmap that said, here is what I envision will drive us to success. But then I had to come back and I had to figure out, where am I going to get a team? That was actually the very first time that I stumbled across accelerants. I think I went out to YouTube one day and I did a search on outsourcing, and up popped accelerants. And there was a video. It was probably from back in 2013. And it was talking about this new model that accelerants had, where they would partner, or they were essentially a global matchmaker between talent and people that need talent. And so I reached out, I believe, to you, Andy, and I said, hey, I need help. And that was kind of the start of being able to build a team. So accelerants brought me a couple of partners. I think there were 3 partners on the list at the time. And I was able to engage with each of them, and we were able to go through kind of an evaluation process. And we were able to match who was the best partner for our specific needs and what our use case was, which was building out this digital roadmap of technologies where we could get to where we wanted to be.
I mean, there's a lot of ways in which you can do this, and often, well, all pretty much always the case. The CTOs have a large number of stakeholders in different functions around you and above you that give you certain parameters of which to accomplish your committed goals and objectives, and in which you're going to be measured by. So, given the fact that you could have gone, local, domestic, boutique, contractors, full-time employees, global integrated. I mean, there's so many manifestations. Like, what were some of the driving factors, the stakeholder requirements, your limitations, perhaps? What can you describe some of the factors that sort of allowed you to sort of focus on a particular path like this?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily have a budget, which sometimes, CTOs, when they're given a task, it's kind of a lay out your strategy and then go out and see what it's going to cost and bring that back to us. And so that's where I was at. I didn't necessarily have a cost. One of the things that I knew is that we were in a smaller area with what I would call it was talent landlocked. We had 2 other major businesses that were in the area that pulled most of the talent that was there. So I knew that going after full-time talent was going to be challenging, because the skills that I was needing were kind of cutting edge. It was not necessarily the technologies that had been around for 15 years. And so I had those 2 things that I was looking at. I was looking at, I've got newer technology. I've got this talent challenge because I'm constrained by what is here. I don't really have the budget to pull people in from other major metropolitan areas. And so I said, okay, well, maybe there are some pockets around the world where they have talent, where they have, an infrastructure of universities, but they also have the cohesiveness of a team, and they have these new technologies. And maybe I can leverage one of those to be my team. And that's exactly what I did, is that I essentially adopted a partner as my team. And they had the skills and the resources that we needed.
Now, obviously, we all learn as we go along. We all make mistakes. Hopefully, we make smaller mistakes and we iterate from that as leaders and as just professionals, right? Can you describe maybe at the beginning, when you were building this team and building this model, sort of what steps you took in order to prepare and to create small increments of value, perhaps, or not. It depends on looking back in Monday morning quarterback, sort of what you would have done differently or what you learned from that. But it would be interesting to understand, sort of in the early days, how you compiled and created a development environment that produce X value, and follow-on questions. We want to delve into sort of how you improve that process along the way?
So in my situation, I think I stumbled on a really good team. My first provider was in Colombia. Um, I did the evaluation. I took the three teams or the three companies that Accelerants recommended. We narrowed that down to two, and then we had quite a few conversations. We went through and did a side by side comparison between the one that was in Argentina and the one that was in Colombia. And when it came down to it, it really, unfortunately, it came down to the fact that Colombia was a little bit shorter of a flight, and so it was going to be a little bit easier to get there. But looking back, it was actually a really good decision because of the fact that the partner that I selected in Colombia was very mature. They were very good at Scrum, but they did it in a way that they were also CMMI level 5, which it didn't mean a lot to me at the time, but I've come to realize just what that means because of the fact that normally CMMI certified businesses don't necessarily mix with agile businesses. But they figured out what that blend was, and it really came down to repeatability. And so they were utilizing agile processes, but they were doing it in a repeatable fashion. And so they taught me so much about how agile should be done. I had been in businesses where we said we were agile like, and all it meant was either we had a backlog or we had a daily stand-up. But that was all it meant. When what I learned from this partner was that there was so much more. And when you do it in a repeatable fashion, it does give you a very solid base to work from. Later on, I was the chief digital officer, and there was a CIO that had an IT organization. We later merged those two together, and our internal team adopted most of the practices from that partner because of the fact that they just proved themselves out. So I would say that I lucked in, or I stumbled in to a pretty good partner who made me successful in spite of myself instead of me making them successful.
Choosing the right partners can make or break your project. What are some of the important qualities you look for in a partner? Since you've now gone through the process, you spoke to different ones, you found the one that at that time fit the piece of the puzzle for that project. So, what do you find that is a must-have or something that, is a red flag to you?
So for me, one of the things that I like to do, I like to look at their culture. Not only do I look at, what do they put out? What is their sales slide deck? Because they all have a good front end of the process. They all say, they all promise what they can do. What I like to do is peek behind the curtains a little bit. I like to go out and look at, their Facebook feed. I like to look at their Instagram feed. I like to look at, do they put out their images of their teams having fun? Can I get a sense of their culture based on their what they portray to the world? I've seen a lot of companies that, they have a great story, and when you go out to their website, it's all highly polished and all of that, and then you go to their Facebook page, and all it is just the corporate marketing, and you don't actually see who the people are, and to me, that's a little bit of a red flag. Not to say that they're not a good company, but I like to see who's going to be on the project. What is their personality? Because I think that the culture is it just signifies the personalities of the people that are in that environment. Do they like to have fun? Do they like each other? And I think that creates a good cohesive team from the start, and then you can build on that.
Speaking
So
of
Troy, just
go ahead, Andy.
I was going to say, so just building on that, let's say you get lucky, or through your own, wisdom and experience, you do the vetting, you find a well vetted, proven, trustworthy partner, and you feel like it has hypothetical good potential. Now let's flip that around. Even that partner probably has some phenomenal client relationships and some mediocre ones and some poor ones. What is important from a client perspective? What does the client have to do? What accountability does the client have, and what do they need to do in order to make sure they become one of those, premium partner clients, because it's a two-way street, obviously.
You're absolutely right. It is a two-way street. You can have the best partner in the world, and if all you do is stand them up and throw some work over the wall to them, they're going to struggle. You really needs to be collaborative. One of the things that I found very important, and we just kicked off a new relationship down in Brazil, and this is one of the things that we did, is that we traveled down there to kick off that relationship, and we spent a couple of days. It's a rushed project, but we did take a couple of days out of the schedule, and we said, okay, we're going to sit down with the team, and we're going to figure out what this combined culture looks like. Now, the first thing that we did is we took a look at how do we get to know each other's business? Not only how do they get to know our business, but how do we get to know their business? How do we get to know what their strengths are? How do they get to know maybe what the peculiarities of our business are? Then we did the second day where we looked at the development environments. And we said, okay, well, what is the development team internally and what is the development team in the partner? And how are those going to mesh? What is the communication going to look like? What are the processes going to look like? How are we going to work in a combined environment? And then after that, then we started to have some of the little bit more complex questions, what's going to happen if these scenarios occur? If we have problems, if we miss deadlines, if we, the quality goes down. So you have to have those conversations up front as well. But if you set the stage so that both groups know what to expect and both groups know what success looks like, then I think you get off on the right foot. Now, that's not the end. I believe that ongoing engagement, either in daily meetings or in weekly meetings with, at least a status update, I think on-site visits, I think that all of those are super important throughout the life cycle of the relationship. Just, I've had some great teams, but what I've recognized, and one of the teams we actually kicked off, it was the very first week of COVID, the very first week that everybody went and started working from home. And we did one of these kickoff meetings, but it was from home, and it was new because it was all on video conference, and we went through those steps. And the first part of the project still went well. But when I went down there and I actually met with him in person, I mean, it was 9 months into the pandemic, and I had to work around a few things to be able to get down to Brazil in the middle of the pandemic. But once I got down there, the relationship changed. It was more personal. These people that I had been working with for 9 months over video conference became real. They became my team. Not to say that they weren't before, but it's just a whole different feeling. And so I think that on-site engagement is so critical for that relationship to flourish.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of companies try to push back on that simply because of it could be budget, but it could be logistics or timing or complexity. And they think they can pull it off through video conferences like this. But, your point about, even though you're face to face here, being physically present there sends a lot of signals. You have a whole different kind of conversation than you would just on video, right?
So interesting thing is that when we chose our first partner, it was between Argentina and Colombia, and everything that I had heard about Colombia scared me. I thought, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going down to this country that has such a bad reputation. I don't know if I don't even know if I'm going to live. I'm going to be able to come back. But then I went down there and I fell in love with the place. I mean, it's probably one of my favorite. I've been to multiple places around the world, and Colombia is probably in the top 2, maybe 3 places that I've ever been. But yeah, I mean, it can be scary. It can be very scary to travel to, especially if you've never been outside of the United States and you haven't worked with people in these other cultures. What I can tell you is that the companies that I've worked with take such extreme care of their clients. I mean, it's like white glove service. From the time that you arrive at the airport, they make sure that you're picked up, and they work with you to make sure that you get to the office every day. And I mean, they just bend over backwards to make sure that you have such a good experience. And so I mean, yes, it can be scary to travel to a foreign country, and I think even beyond budget, sometimes that is an obstacle. But these companies that you're a client of, they do so much to make sure that you have a good experience.
Absolutely. And it's there's look outside of our own little bubbles in your community and my community, it can get scary. And you add to that a different country and a different language. Uh, but if we take precautions and if we work together to make sure that things don't go haywire. I'll tell a real quick story. I've been traveling software engineering around the world for 30 years now, and my first trip to Colombia, I came with the same trepidation. I'm like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? And I remember when I landed, it was probably midnight in Bogota, and a driver picked me up with a sign, and I'm thinking, okay, is this like his trick? Am I going to get pirated, hijacked? I don't know who this person is. They had my name on there. People can get that. He walked me out to a parking lot. It was about 500 yards. And I think his van was the only van in the middle of a pitch black parking lot with a single light in the middle of that parking lot. And we got to the van. I'm thinking, okay, this is kind of scary. And you see, I forgot something, back at the concourse or something. And so he just walked into the darkness with me beside a van with the light over it in the middle of Bogota, Colombia at midnight on some night. And I thought, this van's going to blow up, or like, and I slowly started walking away for the van and keeping a distance and just feeling like, and he comes walking back and he looks at me like, you okay? It's like, is there something? It's like, there's just too many things going through my head. So.
I had a trip like that back in the late 90s. I went to, I flew into Istanbul, and first time out of the country that wasn't like Canada or the Bahamas. And I didn't check the exchange rates. I didn't check anything. And I tried to get on the bus to go to this cruise ship, and they said, no, staff, you got to get your own way. So I went to the ATM, and the lowest bill was $5 million. And I go out to get a taxi. No one could give me directions. Nobody spoke English. And I sat in the back of a taxi for 45 minutes not knowing if I'm going the right direction. And then we finally found the ship, and the guy dropped me off, and I was just like just buckets of sweat. So I definitely get the freezing up of going somewhere unknown, especially if you don't speak the language. And it's one of those things where, yeah, it would have been nice to have a cell phone with Google Translate, and it probably would have felt a little bit better. But it's one of those, it's a necessity, and sometimes, yeah, like it's a big step for a lot of people.
It is a very big
Yeah.
step.
But one of the themes we've been going over, we've been talking about culture, right? How do you mesh the culture of your own company with your new partner? Because they're going to have their own company culture. And then you have that team, and you want to mesh everything together so you're cohesive. And yes, they have their culture and yours, and meeting them in person is fantastic. I got the chance to actually meet some of our partners down in Argentina, and you got to know them and eat with them, and talk about things that weren't always business. So how do you open that up to, this is the way we do business, this is the way you're going to do business, this is how we're going to do business together? How do you approach that?
I think it's just open conversation. You just, I think that the key is you have to treat them as a partner. They have to know that you're vulnerable, and then they will be vulnerable. And when you can get past that I'm the boss and you're the outsourced company, and it's more, hey, we're partnering on this. We both need to be successful. I think it opens the door for those conversations, but you have to talk through them. I mean, even when the conversations are difficult, you've got to have them. Whether it's they brought the wrong resource onto the team, and you need to swap them out, or they're falling behind, or their quality is not quite up to what the level is that you expected it to be. Instead of just blaming them and say, oh, it's just this third party and they can't do anything right. It's more like, okay, these people are our partners. Let's work together. Let's have the honest conversations. And what I've found is that anytime you have the honest conversations, they're pretty good about just going and fixing those. They have a lot of the hard conversations behind the scenes, but they don't want to leave things wrong. They want to do best for their clients. They just need to know what the best is.
Troy, do you structure teams in a certain way, integrated teams in a certain way early on versus, over time? Because at first, you have a new relationship. You want to get them sort of accustomed to the way you work and the way you think and the way you communicate and the way you problem solve, and also you're transferring knowledge, from zero to, to a higher percentage over time. So, do you have a personal philosophy that's maybe evolved over time, or what would be your recommendations as far as starting a relationship and the structure, and then maybe how it might change over time?
I mean, the most successful teams that I've seen have enough um, that they can do an entire small project by themselves. So it's kind of self-contained. What I found is that if you try to pull off resources and put them onto your team, it's a lot harder for them to integrate. But if it's an autonomous team in the beginning and they can rely on each other, at least in those beginning stages for things like the business analysis and the QA and the development and some of the processes, over time what happens is that the boundaries of that team start to expand, and then you can actually pull individuals off, and they feel more comfortable because the cultures have started to mesh.
I mean, since we've built the culture, how do you start to build trust within the teams? Is it more, you said that the dynamic changed when you went down to Colombia. Can you build trust in a virtual model where you're in the small box and having a virtual, or do you feel like you have to go be in person to build that trust? Because, as we've seen, you build trust within a relationship, you go a lot farther.
It's easier to kick it off in person, because the dynamic nature of that relationship just flows easier. It can be done virtually. Like I said, we had no other option when we kicked off our project in Brazil. It was the pandemic. Everything was new. They sent everybody home to home office. We were at home. All we had was Zoom and the ability to connect virtually. So we tried a few different things, and probably the one that carried through that entire project of almost 2 years was that every single daily meeting we had an aspect of fun in it, and we started with just backgrounds. So we would say, okay, tomorrow you're going to use the picture of your favorite food as your background, or tomorrow you're gonna have your favorite destination location. And that was all right. We had a good time. We kind of got to know each other, and then we went around the group, and everybody kind of said, well, here's what my background is, and here's who I am. Where we kicked it up a notch, and this is where we really started to have some fun, is when we started doing brackets. And so we would pick a theme, and we would fill out a bracket with 64 different options. So for instance, we did movies from the 2000s. And so we would pick out 64 or 32 movies from the 2000s. And we would have everybody go through and fill out a bracket. So who's going to win each of the contests in round 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then everybody sent those to me, and I recorded them all. And then every day, instead of just having a random topic, it was a competition between two of those items. So, we might have, I don't even know what movies from the 2000s would be. Maybe a Batman and Spider-Man. And so, half of the team would have a Batman background and half the team would have the Spider-Man background. Well, what got to be fun is that you saw everybody's personality in that, not only in the choices they made, but the competition that they had. So as they got closer, because it wasn't just bragging rights, because what I did is that at the end of each bracket, I would send out gift certificates to Amazon.com, because those were relatively universal. And so it became a competition. So people were jockeying a little bit here and there, not only to have their people, the ones that they chose, win, but also to be the winner of the overall bracket. And so we did that through many different brackets, and we got a little creative. Um, we did music one time, and the last round was you had to lip sync or you had to actually sing, and we saw people's personality come out in that. But what it did is it made people, they felt excited, and they wanted to join daily meeting. It wasn't just a status meeting. It was really an extension of us connecting, and we were able to see each other's personalities. Um, we had a lot of fun. This was when I was working with a company in Brazil, so I would mix it up. And when we did music, I did a combination of English music and Brazilian music, and they actually liked the American music better than the Brazilian music. And some of them would throw in some German music, and so I mean, we got to see a whole different side of everybody there, and it just made people feel like they were included, like they were part of something bigger.
That's great. I whenever I would travel to a service provider site, my philosophy has always been 50-50 or 60-40 business to team building. And team building is typically like my team building ideas focused around cultural appreciation and aspects of the service provider's culture that brings the individual's pride. It could be around music or movies. It could be around food, obviously, is very typical. Other sightseeing places that they wanted to take someone to give them a very positive impression around the great things about their culture, because that fills a person with pride. They feel like they're giving and they're sharing, and it makes them feel good. Also, like extended families, and it it allows us to know more about a person and how they think and what's important to them, uh, both individually and culturally. And so, examples like this, Troy, is fantastic. So, um, if you were to guide, and maybe this is two different personas and two slightly different answers, but if you were to guide an inexperienced CTO and as they're embarking on trying to develop a globally distributed team, or maybe a CTO who has failed over repeatedly over times because maybe they just were transactional and they focused on the wrong things. They didn't do a lot of the same things. Um, what suggestions would you give to them in terms of embarking down this path?
Well, and I think it goes back to the concept of heart. Um, the connection of the hearts needs to be there. Yes, it's about processes. Yes, it's about practices. But when it comes down to it, it's about people. And I think that the greatest success factor in any relationship is the people. And every single person on the team needs to feel like they're a part of something, like they're valued. And I think that when both sides of any relationship can understand that they're working together towards a greater whole, but they're all individuals, and that heart gets connected, that's where you have success.
It's interesting. We do a lot of team building, and once a month we do like trivia or something. And I think it's nice, especially since we all don't get together as often as we could. It just gets to show we know everybody's kind of personality, who's going to do things. Especially if you're talking about singing, it's like, oh, who'd be the first person to sing, and no one ever does it. So it's always fun to be able to connect with the people that you work with, because I've had situations where I've worked in-house, I've been virtual, and I feel that if we get together and understand one another, no matter how big or small the team is, that you tend to work better with people. You understand what makes them tick. And especially knowing, like, we went down to Argentina, we played paddle with one of our partners, and which is kind of like paddle ball, but and racquetball. And it was fun, right? This is something that's huge in Argentina. So we got to like spend time, and I really like, Andy's like, part of it's got to be personal and part of it's got to be business, because I think if you open up the relationship and you make them feel at ease with you, that it'll be a better relationship. Um, that being said, did you have any time where you felt like it was hard to make that relationship? And if it was hard at the beginning, how did you ease it to make it, mesh the culture or even like the project itself, where it might have been really hard at the beginning and then you were able to work through it and make it a successful partnership?
So we tried a couple of times with some resources in the Philippines. Um, we never did get to the stage where we had a full team. We didn't get to a stage where we were able to visit on site. The relationships there were much harder. Not only did we have the time zone challenges because we were opposite time zones, but um, it didn't have that same team cohesion. So the opportunities that we've had where we've started with a team and we've integrated that team, and then brought individual resources over more as staff augmentation, were much more successful.
Hmm. And that's not a indictment on the Philippines, of course, because
No, it's
actually, as
not.
a culture, the Filipinos are very warm and family oriented and very, I guess, touchy feely.
No, and I've been over to the Philippines to meet with people in our office staff, and I love them to death. They are the most amazing people, and I have great relationships with them. I think that what was the struggle is that we didn't get that opportunity with the partner because we were doing more staff augmentation. It was not the people, it was not the partner. I think it was the situation. And had we done some on-site visits and done some of that team building, I think that partnership would have flourished just as much as the partnerships in Colombia and Brazil and Uruguay.
Yeah. So, um, there's a couple of themes I'm hearing here. One is like a servant leadership. Uh, serve your service providers so they can, in return, produce more value and more of the benefits that you're looking for you. Um, the other thing is, I guess it's go slow to go fast, which means, before you just jump in and start measuring productivity when you don't really even know one another and how each other works and communicates and what's important to the team and the individual and all of that. But and there's a certain degree, and I'd kind of like to ask you about, one is how much, where is the balance between going slow to go fast and then getting like early results, measurable results? And two is how do you maintain that over the long run in order to maintain and continually improve the cultural dynamics?
So I think that the concept of going slow to going fast, make sure up front that you have those conversations, even though sometimes it seems like a waste of time to sit down for a couple of days and go through your business model and their business model and your development model and their development model and processes. It does help. In the end, it pays dividends. I also think that you've got to celebrate early wins, even though they might not be big. You've got to celebrate them. I remember with our very first partner, we were on site, and we had a couple of days of discussions about what the project was going to be, and um, they went off and they did some. They did some user interface design, and they brought it back to us, and we just celebrated that. We took pictures with it, and we said, this is great. This it's not a huge step, but this is a great step. And I just think small wins up front, just celebrating those, that's a good way to get started. Now, longer term, that same delivery wouldn't be celebrated because it's just part of the norm. But you're going to celebrate other things. But up front, make sure you take an opportunity to celebrate those small things that get done as a team, because I think that gives you an early momentum in your project.
And then how do you build sort of continual improvement over time?
So I think that the continual improvement, what I've seen, and what I've experienced, is kind of those every sprint meetings. So you do the sprint, you go through the ceremonies, whether it's the daily meetings, the demo, the retrospective, the planning, the grooming, all of those. You do those with the team, and then you usually have a check-in with whoever the program lead is to look at the metrics and say, how are we doing? What is our velocity? Do we have any challenges? Is our quality at the level that we need it to be? And so you look at it at a macro level, You're going to do that in retrospective to some extent, but it's a little different because when you're looking at it in retrospect, you want the team to come up with what went well and what didn't. You don't want it to be client heavy. You don't want the client to come in and say, here's the list of all the things you did wrong. You want that to be team specific. You want them to be identifying what they can improve. And then after the sprint, as you're meeting as a manager or as management, then you can be looking at the metrics and going, okay, how do we make some slight adjustments so that we can get better as an overall team? So one is internal and one is external, but I think they're both important.
Excellent. Excellent.
Well, Troy, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Your insights into the human side of team dynamics and leadership are truly enlightening. I know that Andy and I have learned a lot about the importance of trust, personal connections, and team pride. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us. For our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to our podcast and leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite platform. Stay tuned for more conversations on how technology continues to reshape our world. See you next time on Software Without Borders.